So back in late 2025, the US government just stopped. It shut down. And for 43 straight days, the entire country was kind of holding its breath. It ended up being the longest shutdown in American history, and it all boiled down to a deadlock over one single issue. So how did it happen? What was the real cost? And was the deal that ended it a real solution, or was it just kicking the can down the road? Let's get into it.
It all kicked off on October 1st, 2025. Congress was completely gridlocked, and just like that, the funding for the federal government ran out. The result? A shutdown that dragged on for 43 incredibly long days. I mean, it shattered all the previous records and just left the country hanging.
And this wasn't just some abstract political fight. We're talking about almost 1 million federal employees who were suddenly sent home without a paycheck. And that's not even counting the millions more. Small business contractors, families who rely on government services. The fallout for them was immediate, and it was rough.
Okay, so how on earth did we get here? Well, in a really divided Washington, Congress just could not agree on the basic, fundamental bills you need to fund the government. But here's the crazy part. This historic deadlock wasn't about the entire budget. Nope, it came down to one single sticking point.
That's right, the entire 43-day shutdown, all of it, hinged on one critical issue: healthcare subsidies for millions and millions of Americans. This one thing became the line in the sand that neither party was willing to cross.
So at the very heart of this whole conflict were the Affordable Care Act subsidies. You probably know it as the ACA. These are basically tax credits that help make health insurance more affordable for people. The problem was, an expansion of these subsidies was about to expire at the end of 2025, meaning millions of people were looking at the real possibility of their premiums just skyrocketing.
And this slide really lays out the two completely different game plans. On one side, House Republicans passed what's called a clean funding bill. Clean just means it would keep the government open, but it would not extend those healthcare subsidies. On the other side, Democrats countered with a plan that obviously did include the subsidy extension, and they framed it as a must-have to fight the rising cost of living.
So the battleground shifts to the Senate, and everything just hits a brick wall. First, the Republican plan fails. Then the Democratic plan fails. But look at that final vote. The Republican plan actually got a majority, 51 votes, but it still failed. Why? Because in the Senate, you need a 60-vote supermajority for most big bills to pass. They couldn't get there, and with that failure, a government shutdown was basically guaranteed.
All right, so the political drama in D.C. was one thing, but the shutdown immediately started sending these massive shockwaves all across the country. The ripple effects were being felt far, far beyond the Capitol building.
So, what was the actual damage to the economy? To figure that out, we have to look to the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. Think of them as the official, nonpartisan scorekeeper. It was their job to add up the real cost of this political standoff.
And what the CBO found was, well, it wasn't pretty. As you can see on this chart, the damage wasn't just steady, it got worse the longer it went on. A 4-week shutdown would chop a full percentage point off economic growth. At 6 weeks, it's 1.5 points. Every single day of this deadlock was putting a heavier and heavier brake on the entire U.S. economy.
And this right here, this is the most important part. Yeah, some economic activity would bounce back once the government finally reopened, but the CBO figured there would be a permanent loss of $11 billion. That's money, business, and productivity that our country would just never, ever get back. Gone.
Beyond the cold, hard data, you could just feel the frustration building across the country. This quote here from KFF Health News really captures that feeling perfectly. It calls the whole thing incredulous and maddening, that people's access to affordable health care was being used as a tool for political leverage.
So, after 43 very long days, with the economy taking a hit and public anger boiling over, something finally had to give. A breakthrough happened. But, as we're about to see, it was an incredibly fragile compromise.
The logjam was finally broken by a small, bipartisan group of senators who got together to hammer out a deal. And in a really critical moment, 8 Democrats actually crossed the aisle. That gave the bill exactly the 60 votes it needed to move forward. That move forced the House, which had been sitting idle for over 50 days, to come back into session and vote on the deal.
So, what was actually in this thing? Well, first, it gave them enough short-term money to reopen the government's doors. It also guaranteed full back pay for all the federal workers, which was huge. And it paid back states for covering costs like food assistance. But the key word here is short-term. This wasn't a long-term fix.
And here's the huge catch, the big but in all of this.
While the government was back open and people were getting their paychecks, the fundamental core conflict that caused the shutdown in the first place, it was left completely unresolved.
That's right. The compromise did not extend the healthcare subsidies. Instead, it just punted that whole fight down the road. They basically scheduled another high-stakes showdown for December. They didn't solve the problem, they just hit the snooze button on the crisis.
And that really leaves us with this huge question. The 2025 shutdown didn't end with a real solution. It ended with a postponement. It just shines a spotlight on a system that seems to rely more and more on these temporary patches for really fundamental problems. It makes you wonder, when a compromise is just temporary, is the crisis ever really over?